In this video we're going to show you how to install the Madrone links with ball bearings on a jab that has bushings. So this is the update video. You might be updating the links if the old bushings are worn out, or maybe there's some stiction in the linkage after it's been exposed to grit over time. But if you do get to a point when you need to service the bushings, we recommend converting from bushings over to ball bearings. So we're going to walk you through that right now. First, start by removing the limit screws, or you may not need to fully remove them, but at least back them out, and that'll give the linkage more room to move as you disassemble it and reassemble it. So we're going to back both of these out. Actually, let's take them out. We'll get to this other tip at the end of the video. Take those out. Set those aside for later. Then it probably helps to go ahead and set the cage lock. So we can do that with a small tool. We use T25 Torx wrenches, or you can use the right size Allen key. I think it's a 4mm. Set your cage lock, and now we're ready to remove the linkage pivots. This is a 5.5mm socket, and I think it's a 2.5mm Allen key. Remove those. There we go. There it goes. Alternatively, you could use one of these parallel jaws pliers. Here's a common one from Nipex that could work pretty well. This is a Amazon knockoff version. You could use that to grip the nut. Just another way of doing that. That one's snug. Okay. And then before you can get to the final nut back here, you'll have to remove the cam. So that one gets a 2mm Allen key. Remove that. Oops. Now you can reach it. Okay, and then you can remove the screws and bushings and links. Everything should come out pretty straightforward. Remove everything, and then you'll be left with the derailleur and springs. Best to probably just leave the springs hooked up if you can. So all of the old parts we're going to put on this tray to keep them separated from the new screws and nuts. Chances are good that if you have the new ball bearing link kit, you're actually replacing the links with the bearings installed, but we do have a process for updating the old links and installing the bearings, but we don't actually recommend that, although it is possible and there is a way to do it. But we recommend buying the links with bearings. It's just going to be a much better experience overall. even though there's a cost add there. So these old links, we're not going to need those, just save them for another time if you happen to need them in the future. So all the spares go here. We'll leave these out because we're going to reuse the cam screws and then the 2 limit screws. Before you go any further, clean all the surfaces here just to get all the grit and grease off of them so that everything's clean and fresh before you start putting parts back in. Okay, so we'll set that aside for a minute. You're going to need the kit for replacing these, which comes with both links, bearings pre-installed. It'll have 4 new nuts, and you'll need 12 of these stainless steel custom spacers. You'll need to you'll need to use these new top caps for the screws. They have different dimensions and they're a different material, so don't try to reuse your old aluminum colored ones. These are the stainless steel new ones for the bearings. This is a necessary thing, so don't reuse the old ones. Make sure you use these when you convert to ball bearings. We provide new screws with the kit as well. So we'll start by greasing the bearing shields. So there's going to be, there's 4 bearings per link times 2, so that's 8 little grease dabs per link, and there's 2 links, so there's 16 total. And you can see about how much grease we're putting on. The purpose of the grease is to keep future water and grit out of these joints, so you can see about how much we're putting on. I'm going to put a little bit more where the top caps go. Extra is fine. When in doubt, put more in, because it'll just squish out as you assemble it, and then you'll wipe it off later and clean it off. So too much is better than too little. So we've dabbed it on, and then use a small brush to just kind of paint that on. The goal is to coat the shields and where the shields contact the races completely. Just smear that all around. You can clean up any excess later, so it doesn't need to be pretty. That one is good. Do this one. Make sure you get every shield on every bearing. Don't forget a spot. Okay, those are both covered with grease now, and then take your fresh screws and the stainless steel top caps and just preload those. So these are ready when you need them. And to begin, we recommend starting with the rear inside corner of the inner link. So that corner is the one where there's a small triangular shape for the limit screw, so that will be this back corner, and just follow what you can see in the video, and you'll see where it goes and how. So I'm sticking these special washers. It's got exactly the right thickness so that when you clamp this down, the bearings will be running freely, and it also serves as like a dust shield when it's coupled with the grease. So stick those with the grease to the inside, these 2 of them, on this inner rear corner. And then take one of there's 3 of the shorter screws, 30 millimeters long, with the top cap, and you'll use that. and slide it through the top one, just like I am in the video, where the tip of the screw is actually holding the spacer in place. And then find another screw, and maybe it's just like a limit screw or a spare M3, and you'll do that with the bottom one. And what this does is it helps when you slide it over the body of the derailleur, it'll keep those spacers in place, and then you can push the top screw through, pushing out the lower one. It'll help line up these spacers as you do the assembly. Slide the link over the derailleur. The screws should hold the spacers, and it takes some practice, but you have to find the hole just by kind of feeling it, and this will help me slide it through. So now the main screw is slid through, it has its stainless steel top cap, and then there's a spacer in between the link to the main body of the derailleur and then again at the bottom. So there's two of those spacers in there. The screw is slid through, and then while you're here, you can slide this on. This doesn't have to be done now, but I'm going to just do that just to kind of hold things in place. So now I've slid another spacer into the bottom, so it's covering the bottom bushing shield here. And now we'll move on to this corner. First, let's make sure the springs are hooked properly. So the small spring is nested inside the larger spring, and then both hooks are going the same direction, and it's hooked completely over the aluminum. So hopefully you can see it in the video, but both these spring hooks are all the way through the entire thing here. Sometimes they can get hooked halfway, like halfway in the diameter of the M3 hole, but the rear one is in here properly. And then let's get this one. You can kind of watch my hand motions, but a good way to start is from this direction here. It does not, you don't have to force it, you just have to find that right angle. So kind of come in at this angle here, and then make sure you can see both hooks all the way through. And then we're going to repeat the same thing we did on this corner as we did with the other corners. So the grease will hold two spacers. One, two. On the bottom, use a spare M3 screw just to hold it in place. And then on the top one, use the actual pivot screw. And this is another one of the short ones. It's 30 millimeters long. Okay. So now that's staged and ready to go on. Hopefully you can see all this. Reorient it so you can see better. And I'm going to carefully slide this over. You shouldn't need to be stretching the spring because we removed the limit screws earlier. So if you are stretching the spring, go ahead and remove the limit screws. It'll make this much easier. So now that we're over, we're just going to apply a little bit of force with your thumb, pushing that screw gently until you find the hole. There it is. So now I slid it through, and the springs are still hooked properly like they were before. It pushed out the temporary screw, and then we'll drop another shield on here. It'll hold itself in place with grease, and it's kind of a tight fit to the diameter of the screw. Don't use nuts yet because these threads are greasy and we need to have those perfectly clean before we Loctite and install the nuts. So do not put nuts on at this stage. Just let it be how it is. Try to keep them in there without dropping them out. Now we're going to do that again for the outer link, and we start again with the rear corner, the rear outer corner. This time for the screw, it uses the longer 40 millimeter screw. There should be two remaining. So on the bottom, use your temporary screw. On the top, use the long one to hold the spacers. And again, carefully slide it in. and push it through. And put a spacer on the bottom. So now all 3 screws have 3 spacers. There's 2 on the inside of the link and then 1 on the outside bottom. You do not need one on the top where the top caps go. The top cap serves that purpose, so you won't need it. Now we're going to put the final corner together. If the grease got wiped off, you might refresh it. This one's still okay. Use a temporary screw for the bottom one. There. And then the remaining one is one of the short screws. Okay. This final corner, can be the one that sometimes might be a little trickier than the others, just because everything is sort of held in place by the other pivots. This one's actually going together just fine though. So we'll slide it in, and there it goes. Now it's sliding through. Okay, and then put the final dust shield on. And you've got all 4, the hard part's over, all 4 pivots are in with all the right spacers. Each one has a stainless steel top cap, and 3 of the spacers, 1, 2, and then the third one is on the bottom. Now let's go ahead and clean the grease off these dust shields. We recommend using acetone or some strong cleaner. Don't use degreaser or WD-40 or something that's going to leave an oily film, because that'll compromise the Loctite joint, which is very important. Use something that won't leave any film and will completely remove oils and grease. If you do use a degreaser, that's fine, but make sure the final pass on cleaning is done with acetone, or works, but maybe not as strong, would be isopropyl alcohol or something like that. So for this one, we'll use acetone. So take a clean rag, get that wet, and then use that to wipe all remaining grease off the threads and the dust shield. Basically, you want any exposed surface to be fully clean. No grease, no oil, no film residue from a cleaner. I'm holding the top caps with my left hand, the fingers, so they don't push out. And just take that rag, squeeze the M3 threads, and just wipe it off really good so that all the fibers of the rag get into the nooks and crannies of the threads in the spacer. You want this to be clean, totally dry, no oils. You'll get the best Loctite reliability that way. Also, another tip, we learned the hard way that there's a lot of counterfeit Loctite on the internet, so make sure you get a genuine Loctite product, and you can do some internet research there to kind of look for signs that it's not legit. Here's an example of one that's counterfeit. You can just kind of tell by the logo. It's grainier and looks like it's been copied from some other graphics, and there's no brand markings on the plastic bottle, but this one is a genuine Loctite with the brand marked in there, plastic molded in. All right, so threads are clean, and the next step here, definitely use our recommended Loctite, Loctite 277, or the alternate that we also have tested is Loctite 263. Not quite as strong, but also quite strong. Worst case scenario, at least use some sort of red, high strength thread locker. The reason for that is you'll get the best reliability of the nut retention. Also, to that end, don't reuse your old nuts that came off. Use the new ones that came in the kit. Use nuts that have a metallic locking feature, like these have these 3 metal clips in there, or you can use a distorted thread lock nut, but don't combine Loctite with Nylock nuts, because the Loctite will actually damage the nylon locking insert. We also recommend using a torque screwdriver set to 8 inch-pounds for installing these. We've tested different torque specs, and the combination of Loctite 277 and 8 inch-pounds is the absolute best for nut reliability. It works with other Loctites and alternate torques, like you could probably do it by hand if you're careful, but if you really want the absolute best retention reliability, this is the best way that we've found. So now we're going to add a little bit of Loctite to the threads. Let's make sure we can see that clearly. And it's fairly viscous, so, or high viscosity, so you should be able to kind of dab it on there. And you can basically see the amount that we're putting on, roughly. So do that for all 4 corners. Two. You can see the old, or the original, actually, this is applied at the screw factory, this blue stuff. Don't worry about that, just leave it on there. It doesn't need to be cleaned off. It's not quite as effective as what we're going to do, so we can't really use that. Okay, plenty of red Loctite on those. Might have done a bit much in that corner, so I'm going to dab some of that off. What you don't want to do is get Loctite between the shield and the link, but it's just fine if the Loctite gets onto the shield from the screw. Where you don't want it is where parts are rotating relative to one another. And we have a way of looking at that at the end here, so we'll get to that part in a minute if you're worried about that. Getting this thread started. There we go. I'm just getting them started by hand, and then we'll do this will hold everything in place, and we'll torque them down. Two or three. I'm going to dab this one too. I think it's looking like it's too close to the edge of the link there. If you feel like you got too much on by accident, you can always wipe it off with acetone and kind of start over again. Okay, so now we have them Loctite. They've been cleaned. They've been Loctited. We have brand new nuts with metal locking features, not nylon ones, on each of the 4 corners. The nuts are started, and we will now torque them to 8 inch-pounds. These torque screwdrivers are pretty low cost on Amazon in the United States. I think they cost $27. You can probably find another one somewhere else too. Nothing fancy, just enough to get you the right torque. I guess if you were doing this by hand, it's a little bit lighter than I was thinking the first time I felt 8 inch-pounds. Not by a lot, just a little bit. You don't want to over-torque these. There. Okay, they've been torqued, but before you go any further, this is the point to stop and look for red Loctite that might have been forced in between the link and the shield. So there is a little bit extra here. It's not actually in the crack, but I'm going to take the rag and force the fibers into that area and just wick up the excess Loctite. It actually helps the nuts stay in place if there's a little bit of Loctite between the nut and the shield. So that's a good thing. You just don't want it going between the shield and the link. Okay, so now this is looking great. So that's done. Let's transfer the cable pinch screw from the old link to the new one. So there's an M5 screw here that uses a T25 Torx and a washer. Take it out of the old link. And then for this thread, this is where just regular reusable blue Loctite works. We recommend Loctite 242. Whoa, that came out too fast. A little bit on the threads for this one. Sorry, there. A little bit on the threads. And you don't need to even torque this until the cable is pinched in there. Same thing to hold the cam screws on. You can install the cam when you're routing the cable, but for this video we'll just show it going on beforehand. Again, here for these we're just going to put a very small amount of blue Loctite on the tips. Make sure those stay on good. That excess we're going to wipe. Okay. It might be hard to put the cam on depending on which cam you have with the cage here. So this is a step where you could put the limit screws back in, because the limit screw for the inside link holds the linkage in place, and that makes it a lot easier to install the cam and install the derailleur when it goes on the bike. And then the final adjustment of that limit screw obviously happens when you're adjusting the shifting. The material we recommend for the limit screws is called Fix. It's made by Wheel Fanatic. You can find that online. This works the best for giving the limit screws kind of a gummy feel. It'll keep them from moving around or getting loose. It'll also allow you to adjust it a few times repetitively. So it's a really good material for this kind of application. It was actually developed for wheel building, spoke prep between the spokes and nipples. So a similar type of application, but this is what we recommend as the best stuff. Alternative to that is boiled linseed oil, and actually it works similarly, but the Fix is a little bit better overall, but boiled linseed oil works great too. And for both of these, what you'll want to do is apply them either to the threads of the limit screws, or if you have a small pick or a tool or a brush, you can apply them to the inside of these holes and paint the entire thing completely. If you use too much, it will be hard to thread them in, and the key here is apply it and let it sit for a day. It won't work for either boiled linseed oil or Fix if you apply it and immediately install it, because it'll never get a chance to cure up or get to its gummy consistency. You really need to let that sit overnight to get the right behavior. So let's do that. Hopefully I don't over apply this, but I'm just going to apply a little bit to the length of the screw. And the purpose of this is to there's no torque applied to these screws when it's in use. Whoop, I shot it out. So what it does is it makes it so the screw can't vibrate loose when you're riding. But you need to let this cure overnight. I used way too much, so we're going to wipe up the excess. It kind of shot out on me. And then let that sit for a day. So we'll leave that aside, and then we can install these tomorrow, thread them into the limit screw holes, and then adjust them as needed. But let's just go ahead and install the cam, show you how that part goes. They've been Loctited. So we're going to put those in. I can feel the cage is hitting the cam. That's not uncommon depending on which cam you have, so just holding it open with my other hand here. Thread those in. With these, do not over torque them. I think we've published torque specs for these, but I just get them snug, real gentle. The Loctite does all the work once they've been snugged up. So there you go. Make sure the linkage moves freely, and this one definitely does. Yeah, it moves freely through the whole range, basically friction-free. This will give you excellent shift performance, not only right out of the box here, but also down the road after the derailleur gets exposed to water and grime and grit. The ball bearings are pretty significant performance improvement, especially noticeable after the derailleur's been through some harsh conditions. I guess before you're done, don't forget to wipe up the excess grease. Go ahead and wipe all the corners and make sure there's no grease that's going to attract extra grit that you don't want. But the grease does a really good job of keeping the water and grit away from the bearing shields. So there you go.